Thanks for tuning in and welcome to Marketing Bites Restaurant Growth Unwrapped. I'm your host, Brian Siemienas, the Vice President of Restaurant Solutions for Nift. Today, I welcome our guest, John Gogarty, President of Coyne PR. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here.
Great to have you on board. We've known each other many, many years, and we'll get, I'm sure, some great memories, maybe not so great memories, and who knows what part of the closet we'll get into between what we both know about each other. But as far as yourself, you've been in PR your entire career, including working for Sherry Group, Ketchum, MWW, and the past 24 years with Coyne. How have your experiences shaped the executive I'm talking to today?
Well, it's interesting, all those stops along the way have really helped kind of position both Coyne and myself in a leadership role. I think, I was just at a conference out in Chicago, and I talked about this, we've all had some jerks as bosses, and, you talked about some of those agencies I worked at, and I definitely had some bosses that weren't my favorite. But when I joined Coyne, one of the things that was obvious was there was a real push and a real effort to make sure that this was a great place to work, a real place that we'd want to come to every day. And, it's funny, Tom and I both worked at the Sherry Group early in our careers, as a few of the executives here did. And it was a great agency, great people, great clients, but, we just had, a terror as a boss. And, we kind of vowed, if we built an agency, how to do it right. So I think that those, some of those stops along the way helped build the foundation for what Coyne is today. And hopefully it's, continues to be a great place for everybody. But it's been awesome from a career standpoint. Just very proud of, when I joined Coyne, there were probably 8 or 9 people. My office was a closet without a door, and we hung puka beads, and, we all ate lunch together and made every decision together. And to see the growth over the last, 20 something years has been just a really fun journey. So I'm very appreciative to Tom for giving me the opportunity, as well as the clients like you guys at Hard Rock for giving us a chance. So those early days, we certainly didn't have the business being in some of the rooms that we were in, and we kind of faked it until we made it, and we finally made it. So it's been a very fun run.
Okay, so as we talk today, ironically, shocking because we both seem as young as ever, we've been working together almost 25 years. So yeah. I started Hard Rock in March of 2000. You were, at that point with MWW, we worked with you for the 30th. Unfortunately, had to terminate the agreement because of 9/11, and then rejoined a couple of years later when you were at Coyne. And, as you look at Coyne, you talked about that growth. And I mean, it's, from my standpoint, been incredible because you were a small boutique firm that many people hadn't heard of when we first started working with you. And, to your point, over 150 employees, you've got some, incredible clients you've worked with. As you mentioned, Hard Rock, almost 20 years you were with them, Hilton, Shell, Disney Parks and Resorts, Clarendon. But as we sit here today talking, and I think back to when we first started, our goal was, okay, get on the big 3 networks, get on the Today Show, get on a Good Morning America, get on front page of USA Today. And it's just unbelievable, the whole evolution of, some of those now aren't even the top thing you can do, as, good as they all are. Can you describe the evolution of, while you've been at Coyne, the 20 plus years of PR, from where it was to where it is now today?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, and not even to get political, but the last election cycle was probably the most obvious, huge swing and change to what we've seen from a media standpoint, where all of a sudden podcasts and influencers became almost as important, or if not more important, than some of the, traditional media. So it's funny, when we first started working together, and we would get like a placement in usatoday.com, you wouldn't count it. So you'd be like, if it's not in print, it doesn't count, because we were all used to the print edition kind of being the standard there, right? So you opened up your hotel room and there's a USA Today, print copy that was probably, 40 pages at the time. each section was robust, and you tried to get in that purple section. It was a huge, or a little screen grab of a caption, but if it wasn't in print, it didn't count. So we had many battles over that, but it's funny to see how far it swung, where traditional news isn't necessarily taking a back seat because there's a huge place for it. And I think it's interesting to see, is traditional news wagging the influencer dog, or is the influencer kind of wagging traditional news? So what we're hearing from a lot of our, we'll do desk sides with both influencers and traditional, morning show producers and reporters and journalists at different outlets, freelancers. So I think what's happened is those news outlets are definitely leaning in to what they're seeing online. So what's trending on TikTok and what they're seeing on Instagram. And that's pushing a lot of the journalism content you're seeing. But the other thing we're kind of keeping an eye on is, where's AI and some of the search engines getting their trusted information from? And it's still the traditional news sources. So there's a balance between what you're trying to get from an influencer standpoint that can definitely move the needle. And that journalistic, do we trust the restaurant review that's in a newspaper or magazine more than I trust, some sign saying best pizza in New Jersey? So, it used to be a battle between kind of advertising and PR of like, who's the more trusted voice, and PR really held its own there. Now that we're in this whole influencer, and it's funny, every program we do now has to have that component. It has to be a 360 component. Whereas even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it wasn't. So I used to joke when we were working together on Hard Rock, when bloggers were big, and this is early 2000s. We definitely pushed that trend, and we ran a whole blogger network for General Mills that they eventually acquired from us. But one of the problems with bloggers was, if we sent out a John Bon Jovi T-shirt or a Matchbox 20 T-shirt, and we sent it to an influencer or a blogger at the time, and they hated Bon Jovi, or they broke up to one of the Matchbox 20 songs, like this, there was no journalistic credibility there. They would just start ripping, Hard Rock for, how dare you bring up a bad memory of my prom, 18 years ago, those kind of things. And all of a sudden you'd be like, what? There was no credibility from a blogger standpoint, but they were really important for getting the news out. So we started doing a little bit of that blogger stuff early 2000s. That really died off when that paid content became kind of king for a lot of those bloggers that were really doing some really great work. So, some of those early blogs were great from a family travel standpoint, restaurants, and from a lifestyle overall branding standpoint. So as we looked at it, one of the things that we saw was that blogger network kind of died off really quickly. The influencer world has really popped up very quickly as well and replaced it. So it's interesting to kind of see where it will be in 10, 15 years, and where are we going to be getting our news from. Apple News, is it a Drudge Report, these aggregators that are pushing out what they are seeing as the biggest stories of the day, just knowing that someone's filtering that news for you. So it's a very interesting time. It's changed dramatically over the last decade, as you mentioned, but it's been a fun journey.
So the term PR, and I think back, PR back when we worked together, we had a media agency, we had a creative agency, and we had you guys as PR. To me, it's almost blurred together. So if you look at your organization, when I say that is, you talk about influencers, and we'll get into that a little bit more. That's a paid media, and a lot of, you're not getting free influencers. That's, a budget. Even in the digital, you've got the organic, you've got the search, you've got to almost do a combination. How much is the blending happening as you look at it from an organization where you are blending those media dollars and lumping together, whether it's digital, in the old days, the in-flight magazine, that truly was advertising. Or, I look at, I pulled up one of our old advertising and marketing plans, and I think 80% of what we did back in 2005 doesn't exist anymore. So, what is that we're changing? Yeah.
It's funny, Brian, that as we look at it, the whole world of influencers in that digital world has really been a wake-up call and has shaken the industry to some degree, because the ad agencies are trying to grab some of those dollars because they see dollars kind of dwindling, as you said, on some of their platforms. So who owns influencers? Is it PR? Is it just marketing? Is it advertising? So some of the ad agencies are kind of dipping into it. There's influencer-only agencies that are out there, and then there's PR agencies. So we really feel that to work best, it's hand in glove with both the marketing and advertising and PR kind of all working in sync to make sure that that influencer market is captured and really keeping that message consistent. And I think sometimes we see that companies that lean in from an ad standpoint. And it's funny, you see a lot of it with like Super Bowl ads now. So how, so many of the campaigns that we saw win awards this year were based off of the Super Bowl commercial from last year. In my eyes, it's a little bit of cheating because you're putting, $7 million or $6 million behind a Super Bowl ad to help get your message out there. But it's definitely a controlled message. So then you look at, all right, we launched it at the Super Bowl, and then we're using influencers or we're using PR to kind of help boost that Super Bowl ad. And as we look at it, who owns it? And, every company is different. So we've seen some companies where it lives in communications, which is, in my world, ideal. But others, it lives in advertising, and it's, we're hands off on influencers and that world because they have their own network built through an ad agency or an ad partner. I think it's probably, it could work either way. I think, selfishly, I want it to live in PR. But I'm sure that the ad folks are doing a good job. I think the difference we can do is we're treating it like a media member. We're treating them as if they were a freelance reporter that's helping get our news out there. So from a messaging standpoint, I think that's why it should live in comms. But I totally understand and see both sides of the view there.
Yeah, as you say that, it's funny down here. Universal is opening their brand new Epic Universe, and it's been employee previews at this point. Was fortunate. Both my kids work there, so was able to go. But they just had what they labeled it as media preview this past weekend, last Saturday. And, the Premier Hotel, ironically, was where most of the bloggers, the people, the Screamscape, those type of people were staying at the Premier Hotel. And the secondary hotel is where they put the local media, which, just to your point, sort of dictates what it is because, TV was always king and, knew some people that were at that second, which is where they put all the local media. So to the point of how the dynamics have changed, would never be treated that way.
It's crazy. When we first started working with Disney parks, we would go down for some of their media preview events. And at that time, we probably had 400 travel writers at daily newspapers and TV and radio hosts that would come down. And it was all travel writers. Now, every newspaper in the country had a travel writer. And AP, filled in the gaps for any of the other outlets and kind of helped dictate some of the national news. But, a Disney parks event now or a Universal event would look dramatically different. You might have 100 freelance writers that are then trying to sell stories out. You might have, literally maybe 50 travel writers that have a signed story, and then the rest would be influencers. So you're probably still bringing in 400, 500 media. I'm going to put quotes around media, but it'll be a mix of influencers. Where does radio fit in? I mean, Disney used to have a whole Radio Row that was, camped out for a week, doing live broadcasts. They're probably not doing as much of that now, but it's very interesting to see who's the A, who's the B, who's the C, and all of a sudden you're like the daily news or a New York TV station might be a C tier, where it used to be an A tier. So totally flipped. It's very interesting. The whole travel writer, food writer, as we talk a little bit about restaurants. You've had restaurant reviewers in every market. We still see that, but who's writing about restaurant trends? It's really being driven a lot by the trades, which is good for the trades, and they help dictate a lot of the business stories that we're seeing out there too.
Yeah, so you getting into restaurants, obviously, focus of the podcast. You've worked with a number of big ones. We talked about Hard Rock. You've also worked with Darden, Walk-Ons, Benihana, Red Robin, Burger King, Firehouse Subs. Given your experience in this space, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for restaurants in PR?
Well, it's really interesting. Sometimes when I see budgets from some of these restaurant brands, and you see, you know, big companies not really spending a ton, challenger brands, really looking to make an effort and to kind of help break through, and then some smaller brands that really aren't putting many dollars towards it. Um, from my standpoint, I think it's really imperative for folks. There's a couple of reasons, but for folks to have professionals kind of helping their in-house teams. So the obvious one is from a crisis standpoint, and just making sure that you're really buttoned up from a crisis situation standpoint. Hard Rock, we probably had the initial crisis binder, which was pre-social media, but it had probably 25 scenarios, and all those scenarios came through over the course of 20 years. Everything we thought might happen happened. A lot of things that we didn't ever dream of happened as well. And they weren't all necessarily crisis situations, but like just, holy smokes, what do we do now type situations. And a lot of them didn't hit the media. Then I think just as we look at what restaurant brands can do, it's that balance between influencers, local media. We're doing a grand opening event, or we're having, a new menu or a new tasting, things like that, that there's ways to really spin it and have fun with it. If you try to play it straight, I don't know if you're necessarily going to get the bang that you're looking for. So we always try to put a fun spin on it. Especially new menus, everyone's going to come out and say, we're now scratch-based this, or, in-house this. And everyone wants fresh, farm to table, and not every restaurant can do that. But as we look at it, really putting that fun twist and halo over some of the news to help drive coverage. And it really can have an impact. We saw some really good sales lifts for some of the stuff we did for Hard Rock. There's some fun stories with programs we did for Red Robin where they were, we were working in a vacuum where there was no advertising dollars kind of put in that time period, and really saw some really amazing programs and some fun, break through the clutter to get people thinking about the restaurants. You want to make sure that you're staying top of mind with your consumers. So, when I was a kid, there weren't a lot of dining choices. I remember, and even the start of Seinfeld starts with them waiting, forever at a Chinese restaurant. The days of consumers wanting to wait and stand in line, for that table it's very rare that I would have my family wait for a table at a restaurant, just because there's so many more restaurants that we can go to. So if we go to a restaurant and they say it's a 40-minute wait, like, guess what? I'll put my name in and then probably duck out and go across the street to another place that does a very similar menu. So you want to create loyalty and reasons to love and reasons to think, hey, what should we do on Friday? Let's try this place. I heard that has some fun going on. So it's really trying to keep top of mind with the restaurants, because there's so many choices out there now. Whether you want casual dining or fine dining. It used to be one shop in town. Now you might have 4 or 5 that you can go to. So I think PR is going to really help break through the clutter and keep you guys top of mind. That's why I always say to brands, like, just don't go in there twice a year, launch your menu, get out. You really need that steady drumbeat to make sure that you're keeping in the news.
Okay, you mentioned a couple brands and successful campaigns. What, without violating any NDA, don't need Tom to have to get the general counsel involved. But
we don't want to get sued again, Brian.
Yeah, don't want to get sued again. What would you consider 2 of your most successful campaigns involving restaurants?
I think one comes to mind. Just it's one of my favorites. So Red Robin, this is maybe 10 years ago, but Red Robin was launching a fish sandwich, obviously around Lent. Every restaurant in America, whether it's fast food or casual dining, is going to have some sort of fish option on Fridays for Lent. So no advertising, big deal. This is a new crab burger. So what can we do to kind of launch this? The original idea was nuns and pre-seat free on Fridays, which I loved as a Catholic school guy. the when we did the math on how many nuns and priests are in America, we realized we might have bitten off more than we could chew. So they said, "Hey, we love the idea. It's a little too much because we don't want to expose ourselves to that many free dinners." So we came back. The Pope was traveling to America around that time. We made an offer to the Pope. We used our WorldCom partners in Rome to hand deliver an invitation to the Pope to have him come out. And if he came to a Red Robin and ordered the fish sandwich, everyone in America would get a free fish sandwich. Now, we knew there's no way the Pope's come to Red Robin. We laughed about it. I used to joke that my mom was rolling over in her grave if she knew I made an offer to the Pope for this. But we made the offer. USA Today picked up on it. A bunch of other media outlets picked up on it. Started becoming, late night fodder and morning show, kind of news over the water cooler segments. It got written up in USA Today 2 or 3 times. Denny Post was the CEO at the time, and she said she would go to, conventions and different interview opportunities, and everyone always asked her about the Pope. Red Robin was funny because they took out an insurance policy on it. We're like, don't sweat it. Pope's not coming, but they need to take an insurance policy out in case. So, they would check in with us and say, has the Pope gotten back? Because we did it on social as well. We're like, Pope hasn't gotten back. But it sold out of their sandwich. It was very successful. It didn't cost much. That's the other thing is something like that might cost, $200 by the time you add up the out-of-pockets of printing out a nice invitation, getting a courier to bring it over to the Vatican, drop it off. The social influence, the social invite was free, the press release was free. So from our standpoint, out-of-pocket wise, it was a no-brainer. This was an easy. The cost of the insurance policy was minimal, but it allowed them to just announce to the world, "Hey, we have a fish sandwich from a burger place." It was important for them to kind of break through. And for all those people who are abstaining on Fridays, hey, they knew about it. So from our standpoint, wildly successful, had fun. I think when I go back to some of the stuff we did for Hard Rock, it's funny as we look at it, sometimes, you have like National Burger Day or French Fry Day. And I think restaurants really should take advantage of those opportunities because they do get covered and it's still that kind of radio fodder, fun things to do on French Fry Day or, Donut Day or whatever it might be. And we definitely had some opportunities to have some fun stuff with that with Hard Rock. I think one of the ones that was a surprise for me because I'd been working on the brand for a while was we did Sing for Your Supper and we did it on tax day. So April 15th, natural news window of people kind of filing their taxes. But it was also, hey, what are free opportunities that are going around, for tax day? So we did it on tax day. I didn't think it was going to be successful, to be totally honest. It was one of those where I was like, I don't know if they're going to really like it. We had some new blood on the team, which is important from an agency standpoint to kind of make sure you have new people kind of coming in, new thinking. Because so many times people say an idea and I would say, no, Hard Rock wouldn't do that, or these guys won't do it because I was too close to it. I might have been thinking similar to you where you're like, we wouldn't do that. So we had some new blood, I think both on Hard Rock and on our team standpoint that brought the Sing for Your Supper together. So the idea was simple. If you sang with our house band, you got a free lunch, midweek lunch, not the busiest day from a Hard Rock standpoint. So it was getting people in the door. People probably aren't coming by themselves, so we're going to get at least another order, maybe 2. So for us, it was great to get bodies in. We had house band in a bunch of cafes around the country. And I think, it wasn't necessarily tax day, but a lot of the, we saw some traction where other agencies, some other cafes used it around the world. So it was a great promotion to get bodies in the door, sing with a live band. So you have authentic music, you had that kind of thing. We had Brett Michaels kind of kick it off from Poison. And at the time, I think we used Cindy Busey, who was talking about drinks and food specials as kind of the pairing for Brett. And we did a satellite media tour, which is an opportunity to kind of get into, maybe 20, 25 key markets where you're doing a live broadcast with their morning show or their new news. So we had Brett really hitting on a lot of key messages, from that star standpoint. and Cindy was head of beverage for Hard Rock at the time, so she was able to talk about some of the food and beverage new menu items. But it was a great opportunity for Hard Rock to kind of flex its fun, creative music roots while also getting that message out about a new menu. So, and the new menu probably wasn't that different than any of the other new menus that we launched. It was a better burger or hand-cut fries or hand-cut onion rings, whatever it might have been that year, homemade sauces, those kind of things. But we were able to leverage kind of news of the day being tax day, which isn't necessarily a slam dunk from a restaurant standpoint, and help kind of break through the clutter on a day that might not necessarily get, burger coverage. So as we just talk about those natural low-hanging fruit, whether it's margarita day or martini day, restaurants can do a good job, brownie sundae day, and all of a sudden talk about the history of the brownie or talk about how your brownie's better. World's most expensive always gets media, whether it's that, $1,000 martini or the sundae with, gold leaf dip, kind of flakes in it. Those things always break through and always get media. So as from a restaurant standpoint, you have to look at, how can we capitalize on the news that's out there and kind of piggyback when we don't have our own news to kind of, break through.
Yeah, as you bring that up, so many different memories came in as you were talking about the, Pope Fish Day and the one where, the brainstorming that happens that never get out there. If you remember for the 40th anniversary, we were, hey, 40 days and 40 nights. And then we started getting some of the religious people saying probably not the, best thing. But, as well as you talked about the new blood, and thinking about, probably for me from a growth, I'm a little bit on the conservative side. I know you're shocked with that.
Don't say.
But surrounding yourself with the team, and if you remember, every week we would have the full marketing team and bounce ideas off and listen to it, and what would start off at the beginning and end up, and you're right, we would bring someone in. I think of Hard Rock Calling, hugely successful event, and then when Kim Matlock came on board, if you remember, she's like, hey, we want to send the digital team to the social media team, and we're like, what? Because that was when it was first big, and we did it. It was a huge success. And, just to your point, it's, I think, so critical because you start getting tunnel vision if you, if you keep the same people and don't bring that fresh perspective in. Because, the one thing, and probably, the Hard Rock Calling, I think of where, was always interesting is that event, if you came to it every year, no one ever brought up an issue. But if you would sit in our recap of that event, you would have thought it was a debacle because we were picking, holes in every little issue that at the end of the day, I remember someone came in who went to the event and like, well, you guys made it sound like a failure. It was the most incredible event. But, that's where to get to that next level, you've always got to be critical and look at things. And, how do you take it a step up the following year or the next activation?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you touched on a couple of different things, but the fresh blood thing, and that's one of the other benefits of having an agency. Sometimes when you're in it and you're really close to it, say you're marketing head or head of comps for a great restaurant brand, sometimes you're so close to it. And, we used to joke at Hard Rock, like when we would talk about taking memorabilia off the walls and having people play it, and like, we can't do it, because there's rules against it. And I'm like, well, you guys make the rules. Like, we can just change the rules. So, but sometimes fresh blood kind of coming in and doing, some fresh thinking for you can help make you look at your brand a little bit differently. So sometimes when you're in it and you're really close to it, you're just, you're looking at reports every, it's probably every day now or every lunch hour, right? Where you're getting those results real time. In the past, you guys used to look at end of month or end of week. So really being able to look at, how are we doing from a business standpoint, you almost get into this, like, did this work today? And sometimes we have to do bigger campaigns that might work over the course of a year or a couple months, that might not necessarily drive traffic today. And that's where those special days come in. But it might be a bigger branding, activation that's helping kind of plant some seeds for down the road. But fresh blood and fresh ideas and fresh creative, especially, for sometimes we work with brands that we don't necessarily have a ton of exposures to. So you mentioned walk-ons. There's no walk-ons here for, hundreds of miles. So when we started working with those guys, It was a new brand to us. We went down and tried the menu, tried it. Sometimes we'll do that where a restaurant necessarily hasn't made its way into New York or New Jersey. And for us, we look at it as a little bit of an advantage because we're kind of coming in a little bit fresh rather than, almost the difference between folks who grew up with Chick-fil-A down south and it's here, it's rare, not rare, it's getting a little more commonplace, but you didn't see a Chick-fil-A up here. So, love to ideate around a brand like that that's not necessarily, ingrained in our lifeblood just because we're looking at it from fresh eyes, which is what the consumers up here are looking at it. So, that's fresh blood is great. And then when you talk about, the recap nights for Hard Rock and all the things that, we would stay up worrying about, I look at it and it's funny, Hard Rock didn't have any communications team at the time. So you were kind of, saddling it up as a marketing person that oversaw comms, but you weren't necessarily a public relations, executive. So there was no PR team. We were, Coyne was, probably had a team of 5 or 6 that was working on your business, that was fully dedicated, thinking and making sure that everything was buttoned up to brand standards, and you guys would kind of give the blessing to it. So as we look at it from that standpoint, sometimes, we work with companies that have teams of 15, 20 people in-house, and then some teams have 0. So, really trying to take a look at, what's the right mix from an agency standpoint, and how do we push the agency to kind of come and deliver good stuff and good thinking for us. But as we look back at those Hard Rock calling days, a lot of would be very different now. Social media, freelancers instead of the daily newspapers that we would invite out to kind of come and schmooze. An influencer being backstage and being treated VIP the way that some of the media were would have huge opportunities for the brand because they would also be able to cover it live. So at the time, we were still kind of chasing a lot of those CNNs and USA Today's, and I remember being like, Brian, it's a festival in London. The USA Today is not covering this, and you get frustrated at that. But whereas now you might have a Bruce Springsteen fan who's running a site might have more, wielding more power and more influence than that Rolling Stone writer, 10 years ago, or that USA Today, entertainment writer. So you might be able to, tap into some of those guys and really make some amazing coverage come out of it, whether it's using a freelancer or a fan site or, something like that.
Okay. And final question, you touched upon it a little bit. I'm going to call it a public service, from Coyne to, the listeners is, as you know, I'd hire you in a second. I did it other companies for projects, but budgets are an issue, especially when you get into smaller chains and independents. 3% of a budget, if you're doing a 20, 30 million, can't afford to hire Coyne or maybe many firms. Other than the special days, what do you think could that person who maybe has them and a team of 1 or 2, what do you recommend that they can do in the PR space that can have impact that's realistic for them to accomplish?
Yeah, and listen, budgets are tight, but I think you also have agencies of all different sizes. So you might be able to find, a small independent agency in your, area, in your footprint, that could do a really good job just thinking for you. I think the investment, and it might be $20,000 to $30,000 in a real in-depth crisis kind of planning session, is probably worth it in the long run. You mentioned some of the clients that we had worked with. Some of those we just kind of came in and did, crisis manuals for, and set them up with the keys, and said, here's we can update this annually or every other year, as the world has changed a lot. So investing in making sure that you have thought through crisis situations, I think, is really important. And honestly, I was a brand guy. I was not a crisis PR guy. We came down to Hard Rock one day with clipbooks. It's Tom Coyne and I, proud of our work for the year, and we sat with Hamish Dodds, who's the president of Hard Rock, and he was like, this is great, but what would you do if a bomb went off in one of our cafes? Like, we need to think through that crisis situation planning. At the time, we probably had 1 or 2 spokespeople that we trusted around the world. So we were able to, make sure that we had some trusted folks on the ground in key markets to make sure that those guys were buttoned up from a messaging standpoint. I think that was step one. And two was to really look at all the things that could go wrong that you guys were worried about. So we always tell people, if you're worried about it, it's probably eventually going to happen. So let's be prepared. It's some of these are no fault of our own. Some of them are our fault of a franchisee or, making sure that kitchen standards aren't being adhered to. But let's make sure that we think through what happens if we fail health inspection. What happens if we have an employee go rogue and do something criminal or something online? How are we going to handle it? So making sure that you're thinking through those scenarios. And I think as we look through from a smaller restaurant standpoint, it doesn't take a ton of effort to make sure folks in your market that are the tastemakers and the influencers. Get to know them. You might have to spend a little bit of money with them, as you talked about before. Some of these, macro influencers you're gonna have to pay to kind of come in. Some of them will do it for a meal and just to be treated like a VIP, and they don't have to be, television celebrities. They might just be, tastemakers in your market or in your town, and everyone knows who everyone's kind of following. So take a look at Instagram. Get some of your younger folks to work on social, to really look under the hood of who's kind of pushing the needle in your market and who you're trying to reach that you're not reaching, and get to know them. Invite them out invite them out just for dinner, for try the menu when we're closed or on a busy Friday night. Have them come in, treat them really great. That can go a long way. Your local patch, your local media outlet, it's not that hard to find out who they might be if you're 1 or 2 person restaurant, not chain, but you have a couple locations. Find out, put someone on, put one of your, social kind of, marketing folks that might get it. If you don't get it, and put them on it and on the case and let them kind of handle it. And we've seen restaurants do a good job with those kind of things. You can also hire out a freelancer to do it, on the cheap if you don't have budget for it. But you talked about 3%. There are a lot of brands that aren't necessarily spending that, and I'm really surprised, both from a marketing and from a digital and influencer and PR standpoint. And some brands are overspending in that area. So really trying to make a name for themselves. So you'll see. Excuse me, you'll see some of that where folks are doing it on the cheap and big brands, and then other folks who are spending a healthy budget on kind of making sure that they're really buttoned up. So obviously we think it's an important tactic to kind of put in your holster, but there are ways around it. If you're a small restaurant chain, there's definitely freelancers to use and small PR shops that we've had partnerships with, and we've seen them do a really good job.
Yeah, as you say that, it's the funny thing, and while I was at Margaritaville and Land Shark, we certainly didn't have endless budgets, but one of the areas, content creation, as you say, is so critical. So what we ended up doing, we had 28 locations, and the one person who was on my team didn't have the time to do it, nor was the content relevant because you want that local. Yeah. So what we ended up doing was rolling out to the locations, and it was, okay, GMs, AGMs, ops managers. If you're our age, you're not the ones doing this because, of course, that's what wanted to happen. If you couldn't tell what's trending on TikTok, you're not the one. So we went and tried to find in the location, who is that bartender? Who is that server? And a lot of them do have that small influencer world and know how to do it. So literally, would pay them a certain amount of hours, in a week. And they loved doing it because it was something they enjoyed doing. They were doing it regularly and were able to share with their friends and, set up the guardrails of, what was appropriate, what not, and approval, but they literally were the content creators. And it cost us, to your point, almost nothing to do that. So we could use that in other areas that were more critical at the time.
Yeah, no, and there's certain personalities in your restaurant that you want to be the face for your brand. And, we had, even in New York, we had, John Pasquale did a great job. We would put him on Fox and Friends. We put him on local, segments about how to cook a burger. He was a trained chef, but also a marketing guy who could do a great job as far as, doing interviews. So we would put him up for national media when we didn't have someone from Orlando flying up. But he was a marketing guy who we said, yeah, we could work with this. He's, calling in radio shows all the time and doing food drops. So you might have the personality in your restaurant and just try to say, hey, here's another opportunity for you to build up your resume. And here's some things we're looking for. Radio drops, very simple tactic that we used to do all the time, where you're just dropping off new food to either the afternoon drive or the morning show. Those days, taking care of those days. Cooking segments are a great way to kind of break through the clutter. How to cook the perfect burger for Father's Day, or grilling season kind of kicks off Memorial Day, and those opportunities are low hanging fruit for a restaurant. And you can go in and try to identify, who the right person is. You want to make sure that they're the right face and the right, kind of personality for your brand. And, sometimes those are gems that you can do a great job with.
Okay, let's get into some personal with the last couple of minutes we have
Yeah.
left. Favorite part of the episode. So first, if you could go back and give yourself advice when you first started, what would it be?
So, business-wise, I think my advice would be probably don't leave a paper trail so you don't get sued when you steal Hard Rock and bring them over to Coyne. That was probably one. Buy some Amazon stock would be two. But I think professionally, you always have to. I tell everyone this: if you're bored at your job, go find another job. If you're not learning every day, and that's one of the fun things about an agency is we're kind of dipping our toes and in so many different industries. So it might be restaurant, it might be travel, it might be global hotels for Hilton. It might be pharmaceuticals or health and wellness. Every day there's new fun things that I'm learning about. So keep your eyes open. My dad told me this when I was working for one of those terrible bosses we talked about. You spend so much time of your day working, so you want to make sure that you enjoy both the people you're working with, and you want to make sure that there's a moral compass. That you trust the people you're working with, and those are the people you want to partner with. So make sure that the people you're working with are great people, whether that's clients or that's other staffers. You want to make sure that you enjoy each other's company, and that there's a moral compass that you're adhering to, because I think that you'll break down from a personal standpoint. If you're around shady people, you start doing shady stuff. So don't let your guard down from a moral standpoint. Keep that moral compass. It's important. But make sure you enjoy your job. Make sure and I tell people here when they, if they leave Coyne, I would say, make sure you don't get bored. You're too smart not to learn every day, and go out and get there, go out and get it. So, the great thing about public relations is no matter what your personal passion is, if it's restaurants, if it's food, if it's spirits, if it's the circus, if it's dance, theater, whatever it might be, New York Knicks, there's a PR person behind that. So you might not be a good enough dancer to be a Rockette, but someone's doing the PR for the Rockettes, and you can have fun and keep your kind of passion for dance, and be able to be part of it, where you might not have the skills or aptitude to be the starting point guard for the Knicks or the Celtics, but there's a PR person there who's kind of out there fueling it. So not everyone can play for the Yankees, but you can certainly do the PR for the Yankees. So there's dream jobs. You don't have to have your dream job out of the gate. And that's the funny thing. When early in my career, I did nothing but sports PR. And I woke up probably around 30 and I was just like, I don't know how sustainable this is. So I needed to get some other opportunities. The sports work got me into a great account with Frito-Lay that got me the opportunity to work with big budgets. But their sports sponsorship, whether it was the Fiesta Bowl or with Super Bowls or, Pepsi and NASCAR, allowed me to get a great job. And working on big brands like Frito-Lay ended up getting me opportunities to work on great brands like Hard Rock. So I was never a restaurant PR guy until I started working Hard Rock. And, it's funny how our restaurant group has kind of shaped, and our work has really shaped around some of that early work that we were able to do with Hard Rock. So, find your passion points and go after it and go have fun.
What's your favorite activity when not working?
Spending time with my family, but I love to paint. I paint numbers, as you can see behind me. I don't know why I paint numbers, but it's all I paint. And I go to a painting class every Tuesday night that allows me to kind of flex a little creativity and a little part of my brain that I don't normally do. I draw, and I have little kids, so I still do lunchbox art for my kids every day. Make sure there's a fresh cartoon in there every day. So usually when people say, "Are you watching this show or that show?" I'm like, "No," because I'm drawing cartoons. So I'll draw for my kids and I'll paint numbers, whether they're personal numbers that are important to people, but it might be a wedding date or a birthday or anniversary, or just milestones. Everyone's got a lucky number. It's so funny that I consider myself an incredibly lucky person. And we were just joking about this the other day because one of the girls was talking about her daughter getting assigned a jersey for high school softball. And she's a freshman, so she didn't think she could, request the number she wanted. But everyone's got a lucky number, and so many times that lucky number comes from like something random that happened in your life. You were given a T-shirt when you were 7, and it had a number 6 on it, or a number 8, and all of a sudden that became your lucky number for the rest of your life. Or it's your birthday, or it's your girlfriend's, birthday, or something like that. And those numbers kind of stick with us. So numbers have always fascinated me. I'm not a math guy, but I paint numbers, so that's the weird oddity about me. But it's all about trying to flex my creativity and showcase a different side of my professional life.
So as we've talked, you were 20 years at Hard Rock. We overlapped for over 10 years. Let's get into some Hard Rock related questions. First one, we traveled the world together. What was your favorite country?
I loved our time in England. Obviously, I think when we were traveling, we would bounce around from have some fun adventures in Budapest and France. And it actually wasn't even a Hard Rock trip. I tacked it on. I went and hung out with the Springsteen folks when after his London shows with us, he went to Sweden, and I went over to Gothenburg, Sweden, which had some family roots for me. I know, it thrilled my mom at the time just to be able to say I was back in kind of her motherland. So going over to Sweden and kind of getting some VIP treatment. I think Hard Rock was sponsoring Little Steven's Underground Garage Band, and we had a party out there. But just to see how different countries reacted to music and different music was always really fun. So, traveling. I think some of the other key fun things that we did with Hard Rock was, traveling around with the bus, and it did a U.S. tour. We got to visit a couple of those key markets. But I think London was always a fun trip with you and the gang from Hard Rock.
Okay, favorite cafe?
Favorite cafe? I don't know why, I always liked the Atlanta Cafe. I always had some fun times down there. I think, the Atlantic City Cafe brought back some fun memories off hours and had some fun with that. The London Cafe was always great. Obviously, Rita Gilligan, would kind of tell some great stories there too, talking about how important, the personal connection to consumers was. But I think the London Cafe, the original, is probably my favorite.
Okay, did a lot of grand openings, some businesses that didn't make it, from the Hard Rock Vault and Hard Rock Park to cafes throughout the U.S. and the world. What was your favorite grand opening?
The Hard Rock Park was a fun opening, but you're right. We ventured into some other business areas. I think Vegas was a crazy opening. New York, stopping traffic on Broadway, doing things and asking for permission afterwards, definitely was the key mantra. So if we had asked to close traffic on Broadway, we definitely would have been denied. But I think Tom Coyne and I literally stood in traffic lanes and just stopped it so we could get the photo for a guitar smash and then walk out. The other one that was great, I don't know if you were at it, Brian, was we broke the world's record for the largest guitar smash. Don't know if we still own it, but at the Seminole Hollywood property with Janine Reba and her crew, I think we were literally had like 3,000 guitars because of a 3,000 space garage. So it wasn't anything dramatic. It wasn't the opening. It was the opening of a garage. much needed down there, just from the influx of folks. So I think we had Huey Lewis, and Hootie and the Blowfish, and those guys. But it was just an amazing spectacle. And I remember waking up and seeing it on CNN, headline news. And I was like, all right, we did our job. We had a fun night. And those, after parties were always a good time as well.
Best event and memory.
The Hard Rock Calling events were amazing. Just to be able to have the access that we did. Sometimes I would say, someone asked me my favorite concert, just, a buddy over poker. And I told the story of, I think it was me, you, and your wife sitting in the Hard Rock Cafe in London. I think we were just having lunch or milkshakes or something like that. We were doing some work and we needed Wi-Fi. So we're sitting in the cafe. Aerosmith came in and just did their sound check, but it wasn't like a 2-minute sound check. They played a bunch of songs, and it was one of those where we were like, we're not supposed to be here. Keep your head down. And just, I laughed thinking if we didn't have digital cameras to take pictures or phone cameras to kind of capture some of this stuff. But those opportunities to be in the room where you weren't necessarily supposed to be there are some of my favorites. I think, media training and interviewing someone like Shakira was crazy fun. Just having fun with some of those things when we weren't necessarily supposed to be in the room and we were there was the best memories.
Yeah, it's funny that I'd say that weekend, because if you remember, that ironically was my anniversary weekend, and it was the first Hard Rock Calling, and Aerosmith was going to do the intimate concert in the London Cafe to kick off their European tour and announce Hard Rock Calling. And we were in Paris for the Shakira Signature Series event, which went great. My wife and I were going to stay in Paris, and there were some issues in London, so we had to come back from Paris to London. And as you said, we're sitting there, and you and I were running back and forth, and I just put my wife at the counter because she loved the milkshakes at Hard Rock, and she got that intimate serenade from Aerosmith in an empty building.
Yeah.
So
it's funny, and I wish I had taken some better notes, to be honest, because so many of the years blend together. We saw some amazing shows. We saw and we laughed and had some crazy times. But there were so many great concerts. There were so many celebrities, whether it was, a Prince Harry or, someone like that meeting at our table, and we're laughing about it. I remember my wife was like, I have to get my bag. And it was under Harry's chair. And we were like, she was crawling on the floor trying to get her purse. And he was like, you need help? Those kind of but I have no idea what year that was. So you pulling the plug on McCartney is a great one. I was actually back in Jersey and, kind of following along online for that one. But for those who don't know, Springsteen invited McCartney up, and it was him and Little Steven's dream to sing with McCartney. They had never done it before. So he came up to sing with them, and then they had hit curfew in the Royal Park, and power was shut off. So we all blame Brian. We know it wasn't Brian who pulled the plug, but we had some fun blaming Brian. But those kind of moments where, the years run into each other and people are like, you were there. And I was like, I wasn't. Or I would say to you, oh, remember when that happened? You were like, I wasn't there. And I was sure you were there. So, so many fun memories, and the years kind of blend in together. And again, I wish I had kept better notes and had a phono kind of history of it, because there were some amazing times.
Yeah, to your point, that's one of the advice I give myself with document it, because even I've forgotten over the years, and something may pop in. I mean, the incredibleness of what we were able to do with that brand, and as well photos. I wasn't one of those. I liked being behind the scenes, but to your point, you were in the room where it happened with some incredible. And even with my kids now, every once in a while they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, I met that person," or I remember. Nelly Furtado, driving her in my frickin' 1998 car after Hard Rock, before Hard Rock Live show, she wanted to go get something. And then, Grammy winner, or Alicia Keys, when I think Maxwell, she was like the opening act and was just the nicest. And, all these things that I just didn't document that I've probably forgotten more than I remember of just the incredible stuff over the years. So
I'll change my answer to that question you had before about what would I tell myself earlier in my career is take some better notes and bring a good camera.
Okay. What's the worst memory at Hard Rock of a campaign? And I'm going to keep it during my tenure so you don't get in trouble with any future people. So,
I think, well, outside of your tenure, no, I guess I shouldn't say that, but I think, I don't know if I would necessarily say the worst. I mean, we definitely had some situations where we had to, you know, whether it was recalls or some of that stuff, where there were some late nights that we worked through the night to make sure that, safety and security of our guests, was the most important thing. And we made sure that, whether it was tracking stuff down, those kind of things. I think, so Hard Rock gave away the magical mystery tour bus, redid it, made it look beautiful, kind of updated the whole thing. We had a TV station in Orlando say, hey, we really want to get some footage of it driving, just literally go around the driveway and come back up the hill. I pushed Brian to let us drive it, and he's like, it's really not street legal. And I was like, it's private property. We'll just drive around literally the circle of the Hard Rock Hotel in Orlando. And Brian fought me on it. And I said, Brian, we're literally driving a quarter mile down and a quarter mile back. Like, we could do this. And the bus broke down at the bottom of the hill, and we had to tow it back up. And that became like a fun news segment that we were giving away this restored, refurbed magical mystery tour bus, and it broke down. So sometimes when you have great intentions, the mechanics don't always work out. So I would say that's probably one of my least favorite memories, because I'm not dealing with it now. But at the time I was like, oh no, Brian was right. Brian's always right. Always trust Brian. That's my other rule of life. So, but those kind of things where you don't know what the end result's going to be. And when you're on live TV, like, things can go wrong, and usually will go wrong.
Yeah, and your point, I remember that vividly, and the details on that is we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating it. It was beautiful. And I remember it was the one local WESH station here in Orlando, yep. Guy doing the live shot. We gave him probably $1,000 worth of free merch out of the Rock Shop and the Hard Rock Hotel to not bring it up. And he lived up to his word, and the damn anchor back, hey, where is the bus? And then the damn cameraman zoomed in. And, the irony of that is all the money, it wasn't a mechanical. It's because the vehicles were, 1960 something, there were no fuel pumps. It was gravity fed. So when we took it off of the semi, bubble got into the gas line. So technically it ran out of gas. They didn't have enough gas. But at the time, you're right. But as we look back, there were so many of those things that, we just laugh at that, we got the coverage out of. And it,
Yeah, you're right. We buried some stories with merchandise over the years. Merchandise and free food and hotel stays have definitely helped kind of not just Hard Rock, but brands kind of get away from some of the negative coverage that they might have been due.
Okay. And finally, John, what's something most people don't know about you?
I know I talked about the painting. I think I don't think people would ever expect me when I tell people I paint. And I literally have a garage filled with numbers that drives my wife crazy. And I just give them away to people. So it's a personal passion point for me. It's been for, probably 20 something years. And, I have a lot of fun with it. And, if anyone ever has a favorite number, just let me know, and I'll fire it up for you.
Okay. Well, John, unfortunately, that's the time we have for this episode. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed our discussion and journey down memory lane.
No, it was great. Thanks, Brian. And, the importance of PR, especially in that restaurant world, I can't say it enough. It's worth the investment. You don't have to have millions of dollars. You can do it on a shoestring. You can do smart, fun stuff and be creative, but find a good agency partner that will look out for you guys and can think for you and not be so close to it and just flex their creative muscles. So, there's definitely opportunities, big and small, for hospitality and restaurant brands to kind of dip their toe in PR. If you're not doing it, there's a whole world of social and influencers that's out there for you.
Well, thanks, John, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And here's to celebrating the industry we love and serve. Until next time, stay hungry for success.